Salton Sea toxic reality. A new report by UCLA finds that conditions at the Salton Sea are worse than state data suggests.
As morning anchor Angela Chen shows us, scientists are highlighting a critical shortcoming in the government's monitoring of harmful emissions.
They say to breathe easy in the great outdoors. That is, unless you're at the Salton Sea. Sarah Renteria has lived in Mecca for 17 years and says over the years, the stink of the sea has wormed its way into her daughter's body.
During that time that I've been living here, I've met people who have also been sick, and out of nowhere, they get asthma. These children who are bleeding from their noses, out of nowhere too. In fact, my daughter also has nosebleeds.
On windy days, you can smell the rotten egg stench blowing from the lake all the way to Palm Springs. That rotten egg stink is hydrogen sulfide in the center of scrutiny in two new briefs from UCLA.
So our briefs primarily show that the pollution of the Salton Sea is much worse than what the government data suggest.
Previously, that stink has been dismissed as just that, a bad smell. But UCLA's Latino Policy and Politics Institute says the health impacts of the stench have been overlooked.
Here within the valley, since it is so low level and it's a chronic, consistent smell, it can be linked to many different public health issues such as nausea, headaches, dizziness. Those are all things that can come from hydrogen sulfide.
This is how the rotten egg smell comes about. The Salton Sea is replenished by agricultural runoff from nearby farms. That water is filled with pesticides and fertilizers. There's no actual fresh water coming into the lake. All that fertilizer helps plants at the bottom of the Salton Sea grow, which then take up oxygen within the water. Then, when these plants decompose, there is a bacteria that needs energy to facilitate the decomposition process. And because oxygen levels are too low, these plants then use sulfate to decompose, which is how you get hydrogen sulfide. On very windy days, the air mixes with the water to spread hydrogen sulfide to the surrounding communities. The briefs also say hydrogen sulfide emissions exceed what's acceptable by the state of California. UCLA, Alianza, and other groups say they have a clearer picture. They have their own high-frequency sensors measuring water and air quality levels directly over the Salton Sea versus government sensors which are placed in the surrounding cities.
These conditions include toxic gas emissions, very poor water quality, and our findings primarily highlight the need for immediate actions from responsible agencies and the enforcement of standards.
So we asked state officials at the California Air Resources Board to respond on this and had to push a bit. When I asked if officials had even read the report or planned on taking it seriously, the Air Resources Board said it didn't know the methodology UCLA used, and so it couldn't comment. Officials say the state is engaged in a number of research and monitoring projects and takes these efforts seriously. We kept asking, and state officials eventually said they are now evaluating these reports. One thing is for sure, conditions at some parts of the Salton Sea are certainly not improving. To give you an idea of how rapidly the Salton Sea is changing, the last time I was here, this entire area was underwater with levels well above my head. Now you can see the entire lake bed exposed, with the water recently turning a muddy red. The lake can turn red some days because of the active red algae blooms and bacteria that thrive in the lake's harsh conditions.
Our research came about back in 2020 when the Bureau of Reclamation stopped doing water quality assessments. Since then, we've been doing continual water quality monitoring. We know that the water is getting more concentrated in nutrients as the only inflow of water is from agricultural use. But obviously, with climate change and things, we're seeing within the last couple of years that it's been really rapidly decreasing.
I grew up in Mecca, but the community that we reside in has been historically underinvested in. And unfortunately, I think the lake is a very good example of that.
We are Hispanic, and Hispanic communities are more neglected. What I would like to see is some change for the community, for its well-being.
UCLA, Alianza, community members, and more are calling for a number of actions by the state, including reviewing and actually enforcing its own hydrogen sulfide emission standards.
There's such a misconception of the Eastern Coachella Valley, the Salton Sea region, that this is a post-apocalyptic area where no one resides and people don't live here. But that's actually far from the truth. Community members and myself, we grew up here. This is where I'm from. This is a place that I talk about when I go to school, when I talk to my friends. People live here and they're always going to live here.
Now, many of these residents don't have the means to move, and they're begging the state and those in charge to please help. You can watch all of my in-depth reporting on the Salton Sea, its harmful health impacts, and continuing lithium development on KESQ.com. In the studio, Angela Chen, News Channel 3.